The Battlehosts. Be a better gamer, build a better community.
Welcome to The Battlehosts, a podcast and website dedicated to helping you become a better 40K gamer and to build a better community of players. I'm here with Mark, and tonight I have an interview with Brian and Alex from the Splintermind podcast. So we're going to talk about planning and finishing a 40K army, and both of them have very different approaches to how they start and kind of work on and then complete their armies. But first, if you like what you hear, subscribe to us on iTunes and YouTube to catch all the latest episodes. You can also follow us on Facebook under The Battlehosts. If you'd like to support The Battlehosts for as little as $1 a month, please visit patreon.com/TheBattlehosts. If you join for $3 a month, you get access to our Discord chat where we discuss all things related to the hobby. So, as I mentioned in this episode, we're going to talk about planning and finishing a 40K army. And this is very appropriate right now because most of us are under quarantine or social distancing measures because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So, if you're working on how to finish your 40K army or finish a second army or even finish a detachment for a particular army, this is the podcast for you. We're going to talk about choosing an army, planning an army, and sort of the purchases for the army and then building it, and also how to avoid becoming distracted. There's certain distractions that are okay, and there's others that kind of take you away from what it is you want to complete. Finally, we'll just talk about the rewards of a finished army and how we display and store and play with our miniatures. But first, before we jump into the interview, let's hear a word from our sponsor, DGT.
We all love Warhammer 40K, but sometimes games just take too long. Using a game timer is the best way to make sure games finish and for both players to get an equal amount of time. Check out the Easy Game Timer from DGT, manufacturers and designers of the timers officially sanctioned by the International Chess Federation. It's simple to set up and customize, and your settings are saved when it's turned off. It's easy to use with a large moving lever for changing turns and a clear digital readout. It's the most affordable and high-quality game timer on the market and is the choice of most 40K events. Whether you want to practice before a big event or you just want to be a better player, the Easy Game Timer from DGT is the perfect game timer for your 40K events. The DGT Easy Game Timer is available from many online retailers. Wholesale pricing is also available for tournament organizers. Check these fine clocks out at dgtnorthamerica.com. Speed up your game and improve your play with the Easy Game Timer from DGT.
All right, so we are talking about planning and finishing a 40K army, and I thought I'd bring in some favorite friends of mine, Brian and Alex from the Splintermind podcast. How are you guys doing?
Good. Thanks for having us, man.
You bet.
Doing all right.
Yeah, and so we should point out we are recording this right in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. And on a personal note, what are you guys up to? Brian, you're a teacher. Are you working from home now?
I am working from home, except for on the weekends when I break the seal on my classroom. I have to sign in and declare that it was an emergency so I can get any work done because I have a 2-year-old and a 4.5-year-old. So working at home for me, because my wife works 9 to 5 for a biotech company where she has to be on the phone, means I work from 4 in the morning until about 8:30, and then I listen to screaming kids until 5, and then I try to work for a few more hours. So it's a little iffy.
Yeah, having the kids at home during this thing is just a level of stress for sure. Alex, what about you? What are you up to?
Yeah, man, I'm still working too, so it really hasn't changed anything for me. I'm just, marching forward as always.
Yeah, I myself I'm working from home. I brought my computer and everything home, so I work for a tech company, so it's pretty easy to work from home. But the whole point of this was, when this started and we're like, okay, everything's in quarantine, and at first it felt kind of novel or okay, everyone, let's take this seriously. But I don't know about you guys, but we're 6 weeks into this, almost 8, and it's the novelty's worn off, way off, and now we're just doing it. We're in the middle of it right now, and I don't know. It feels like at first I'm like, oh, it's time we can finish all our armies. But how are you guys doing on sort of your painting progress with all this stuff?
I'm hanging in there. I had to, I just moved too. So I've had the whole huge upset of moving and, because of the virus, my closing date got pushed back. So I ended up losing my movers and I had to move myself, and that turned from, 1 day of moving to 14 days of moving. And so that sort of threw everything up in the air. But So it took me a while to get back to the painting desk, but sort of in that time, sort of had like a revelation on what I actually wanted to do. Like for our show, we're doing this thing called the Corrin 4 challenge, where it doesn't matter how many points it is. You're painting up the units that you need for painting up the core units for a list that you want to run for the future. And so while I had that big break, I sort of had a revelation on what I actually wanted to paint. So I put the units that I was originally envisioning aside and focused on a bunch of stuff that I already had it like on hand. Because one of the problems was I couldn't buy anything.
Yeah.
So it was actually good. It was definitely like hitting the reset button on exactly what I was doing. And it helped. It definitely helped.
Yeah. Brian, what about you?
Woo! So if you listen to Splintermind, you know that I tend to bounce around a bit. I'll get into this when we go into like finishing armies and things like that, because my process looks very different as far as like making a list. And I'd really committed to doing this Corrin 4, and I wanted to play Harlequins exclusively in the second quarter this year. Well, clearly that's out the window. You can't play any games at all.
Yeah.
People are motivated by different things. I'll go into this about how, when we go into the like how you do an army thing, painting Harlequins right now is basically just slamming my foot in the door over and over and over again, reminding myself that I'm not playing. And so I have intentionally completely ignored my Harlequins, even though, like, you know, I theoretically should have some time to sneak in while kids are napping and not screaming at me and asking for treats and diaper changes and whatnot. But I've used it to just tackle. It's kind of that weird thing where you want to have the illusion of control when you don't have control. And so I have been tackling weird backlog projects that have just been kind of like cosmic background radiation. Like one day I sat down and I was like, I can't concentrate on anything. I had like 50 partially started projects. And I said, you know what? I'm going to finish the terrain from the Kill Team starter set that I bought 2 years ago. And I, knocked out those buildings. I said, okay, I'm going to, knock out the Kill Team. What is it? The Munitorum kill zone, the crates and containers and tractors and scatter boxes and barrels, knocked all that stuff out. And then I went and did all of my Imperial Navy Battlefleet Gothic fleet. I'm jokingly calling it High Fleet COVID because that's what finally got me to finish the thing. And, I finished 26 ships, and I just have the battleship is the last one to do. And then I have to like airbrush their bases and they're done. And so I'm kind of picking these weird little batches that have short deadlines. I don't want to think of anything really super long term because it reminds me, oh, by the way, Tuesday is the start of week 7 locked in your house. Yeah. I don't want anything like that. And it's just, I don't want to commit to any long-term projects like that. So I'm just kind of picking these like little short finish lines. And a lot of it has just been like weird backlog stuff that has just been annoying me. And in that respect, it's actually been kind of cool.
It's kind of like, when I was years ago when I was getting my master's degree, every time I had to sit down and write out like, a paper or work on some kind of schoolwork, it was really easy to do things around the house because I'm like, okay, well, you know what? The house does need to be vacuumed right now, or, the dishes need to be done. It's that sort of illusion of productivity. Like I'm doing it and it's not even illusion. You're actually being productive. You're not necessarily doing the thing you're kind of putting off, but you're still productive in that respect. And so, you're still painting things that you want to get painted. Sure. It's just not specific around an army or whatever. So,
but the positive from it though is that it really has. I've heard people refer to this like if you were, I've said this on our show, but if you're a person that has lost your job, or you are a person who has been affected by this illness, either contracted it or lost somebody, like clearly this is affecting you in a great way. For other people, just like that are in my boat where I'm just stuck at home and it's more of an inconvenience, they've called this, I've heard it referred to as the great pause, right? Where you're putting your life on hold. And anytime you do that, you are forced to sort of like, if you sit there and just think about all the stuff you're not doing, and you'll go crazy. And so it kind of does encourage you to go to 10,000 feet and take a look at everything you're doing. And it really has made me look at why I hobby and why I game quite a bit. And so these little projects have actually been little, it's not just that I'm clearing it off of my backlog and my I'm annoyed that it's not done sort of plate. I'm looking at these projects and going, well, no, I want to do this because I actually enjoy this. Like, I'm going to paint this terrain because I actually enjoy terrain and I'm good at it. You know, like it's kind of my thing, you know? So it's been a good reminder to do that. And then also just to, you know, in doing hangouts with like a lot of the Santa Cruz guys here, I've done a couple of Colin there in Boise, a couple of online hangouts and just talking. It is important to like remember why you do this stuff and don't lose sight of that. Because I think sometimes if you're like, well, the meta says I need to do this, so I have to paint this unit. Otherwise, I'm not going to enjoy my thing. You're not painting it because you're enjoying it. You're painting it because, I have to do it. And when it's an obligation, it's not a hobby anymore.
So my experience, like, you know, me and Brian have a pretty different method. Like in regards to like like what we're trying to sort of get out of what we're doing. And for myself, like I looked at this period of not being able to go out and play games and all of that kind of stuff as I'm going to come out on the other end of this thing with everything, with a list, like a new list, fully completed. And that for me is really, really exciting. It's like a perfect opportunity where I'm not sort of having to go in with sort of like half completed list concepts into games, and playing games sort of fuels my drive to paint. And, just seeing like where my collection falls short or how the sort of play style doesn't match what I want it to do. It's like, so when my army isn't sort of playing the way that I want it to, it's not even a matter of even like effectiveness. Like if I, you know, for example, if I feel like I have a lack of mobility as an Eldar player, that's like a problem. Like I was playing with Dark Reapers for a really, really long time. And about 6 months ago, I was like, I feel like I'm dragging around this, you know, ball and chain and trying to facilitate the use of this unit. Like, this is not why I play Eldar. And so I incorporated like a lot more fluid, hard-hitting offensive units that were granted less durable than, or elusive than Alatok Dark Reapers. But, that sort of stuff bothers me. And, when I'm sort of like wandering around aimlessly, in regards to painting, I get, you know, I find that really frustrating. It takes away my enjoyment of the hobby. And so, like I was saying, when everything was going crazy with my move in the beginning of the coronavirus and all that stuff, it gave me a chance to sort of reevaluate and like, what are my goals, you know, as a Eldar player? Like, what do I want out of my army? What do I want out of my play experience? And reevaluating that thing, got me super inspired to paint again. I'm painting a lot of units that I really love. They're units that I have, and they really fit into what I want to do. So, it's been a good experience in that regard.
Well, let's set the context here. How many armies do you have, Alex?
I don't know if I'd call them armies. I mean, I have two separate Asuryani armies. I have two different craft rolled armies painted in two completely different schemes with two different play styles. I have like my red and gold Lions of Assyrian, which is sort of like jet bike and mech driven. And I use a variety of craft rolled traits to represent them. Then I have like an Alatok build, my Umbra Watchers. They're all painted in black. They're sort of Rangers, War Walkers, sort of like a night fighting commando style force. I have about 10,000 points of craft rolled Eldar, and about like 3,000 points of Drukhari, 600 points of Harleys, but it's a super playable small detachment. It's extremely hard hitting. And I actually do sort of consider it my sort of third army. And then I have about 2,000 points of World Eaters. It's fully painted. I just haven't played it yet. So
okay, all right. Brian, what do you have? What the armies do you have that you could plop it on the table right now?
Oh dear God. Well, let's keep in context. I've been playing this game for about 30 years.
For sure. Yeah.
I mean, it's God. Oh man. Yeah, this list is really embarrassing. Imperial. Let's go. What Imperial? Astra Militarum, sorry, they're Imperial Guard to me still. Crimson Fist, Space Wolves. We can go what? God, there's a Tau army. I'm not proud that I own it, but I have it. It's playable. Jeez. The Eldar stuff, yeah, my craft world army is massive, and I have a lot of super heavies like Cobra. I have a Cobra. It's a lot of stuff. Dark Eldar, obviously, massive army of that, and Harlequins are in the works. There's a couple of failed ones. I'd put Gene Stealer cults as a failed one, but that's going to end up just being a little kill team side project. Giant orc army, like. There's a lot of stuff, but I mean, as far as stuff that I legitimately play and feel like I can throw on the table right now, it's basically my craft world Eldar, my Drakari, and probably I would throw my Crimson Fist army in there too. Yeah. Like my Space Wolves, there's an army, but it's not.
Yeah, but
I couldn't haul it out really.
You have Death Guard as well, right? And you have
Death
some
Guard.
Chaos as well.
And World Eaters. Yeah, sorry. I forgot about Chaos. Okay.
You've got some Chaos.
So I have some things.
Yeah,
When we go into my process and how I do armies, it'll make sense why I have so many things. It's not just the span, it's also the process.
Well, it's funny to talk to the both of you. You both have very different methods of this, and you can almost see it in the armies as well. Alex is a really tight, focused, themed army, and Brian, where you have a little smattering here, smattering there. I had no idea you had Tau. That was a little bit of a surprise.
He's out of the closet.
It was a dwarf army that I couldn't sell, and the only thing I could do was trade it for a massive Tau army, and it was like 15 more of everything that I would ever need. And I was like, okay, I'll do that. And then I painted it, and I was like, I hate Tau. So.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I have high hopes that Tau will play the way I'd like to see them play, but that's a whole nother. The quick moving shoot and scoot, close range sort of thing, I think would be super cool, but they haven't really got to that point yet. So Farsight Enclave's kind of, but anyways, a whole nother subject. Yeah. So for myself, I have Craft World Eldar. That was kind of because everyone kind of has their first love, the first thing they start with in 40K. I think I found that. Hopefully, the first army you start with is the army that you love the most, because then you kind of put the most effort into it. But yeah, Craft World Eldar. I have some Dark Eldar that I purchased off of somebody. I haven't really played it, just a couple units here and there. I went and built a Knight army because I wanted to start a second army, but I wanted to make it simple, and Knights are cool. And I'm like, okay, well, there's 4 models. That's easy. So
I'm laughing because I totally forgot. Yeah, I have a giant Imperial Knight army too.
I figured as much. And then from there, kind of evolved into having an Admech army. So I have an Admech army, and right now, and 1,000 Suns. It's kind of like it's the 75% completed army. Like you talked about. There's what we call failed armies, where you go in with high hopes and you buy a bunch of stuff and you get them sort of completed, but the rubric Marines are they're meat grinders, man. They're so hard to get done. I kind of stalled out on those things. Now I'm working on a Space Marine army. So it's choosing the different armies. Everyone has different reasons to choose like a second army. Brian, how did you decide on the armies that you sort of, as you started bouncing between the different armies, how did you decide like, from now on, I'll pick this now, or I'll start this army?
Well, I mean, a lot of the collection where there's older things, some of it will come into how it'll make sense when I go into how I plan an army, because sometimes there just isn't planning. It just sort of drops in your lap and you have to roll with it. Because my first army in Rogue Trader, like the old school, Eldar, like the White Dwarf 127 stuff, and before that, like the Pirates, that was definitely my thing. That's what sucked me into the game. I looked in the rule book and I was like, that right there, that's what I want. That's what I'm into. But then, like second edition, my main, played Space Wolves in second edition because I wanted something that played a little differently. And then people kept saying that Imperial Guard sucked. So I bought a giant Cadian army to try to prove them wrong. And that was probably my main army through third edition. I was playing like an all infantry Cadian force. I mean, with Rough Riders, Ogrins, the whole bit. And like, when you had to go with like a quarters, table quarters deployment, it pretty much filled the entire thing. So if they had indirect fire, you couldn't miss, but it was just swamping, it was the contrarian in me that wanted to do it, and that led me obviously into Dark Eldar, because that's the ultimate, hipster contrarian army. And then the Orc army was I moved, my wife and I then girlfriend moved in with a guy, and the previous roommate had just left this massive orc army that was unpainted and unassembled. And the guy was like, yeah, dude, if you want it, just paint it. And so I painted an army, and I'd never played a single game with it, and went down and played. I think it was in the 2003 or 2002 LA GT, and played my first 5 games ever in that GT, which was hilarious. But probably sounds like me going to Boise last summer. But
With the
and then like my Crimson Fist, where everybody has a lot of Space Marines around, and at the time in 3rd edition, I want to say, people, it was an older codex, and people were saying that they weren't good, and the local player was stomping everybody with gaunt spam with Initiative 5, and I was like, I can beat that list. And so I just made a list with like 5 tactical squads and a librarian and a few things, and just the final game in the tournament came down to me and him, and I stomped the crap out of him. But again, it was like the contrarian thing where I just wanted to do it. But most of my armies, like, that's how they generally start. Is sometimes it's I don't see it played in my group enough, and I hear people say that it sucks, and I want to prove them wrong. So I'll try it and do it. And other times it's just, like with Imperial Knights, it was like, they looked cool. I painted one, and I was like, I'd like to do more of these. And so I got, the 3 at the time Forge World ones and the plastics and things like that, and just, tried it out. And that's basically why I have so many armies too, is just that it's over such a long span of time that you kind of go off on a kick for a little while. And sometimes a model will just speak to me, and then like once I paint it, I'm like, I want to paint things that are like this, and just an army can evolve out of it. And I go on rolls, and that's sort of how it happens. Yeah.
So it sounds like some of it is you had a couple armies kind of fall in your lap. Some of it is like, I really want to go in this direction with something because it's the contrarian in you. And in other times it's like, this is a cool thing that I want to try out.
Yep.
Like, Alex, what about you? How did you choose armies, or how did they kind of the armies you selected? How did those choices? How did you make those choices?
Like for me, when I got back into the game, I started with Eldar Corsairs. This is like late 5th edition. So part of it was wanting to sort of dip my toe in all of the, Eldar pools. I wanted to pull in just sort of like because originally when the Corsair book came out, you could take a little bit of Craftworld, a little bit of Drukhari, and you could take Harlequins. And I was like, okay, I want to do that. And then that army didn't really work in 6th edition. So I wanted to recreate it using the various codices and the ally system. And it was still very the thing of it is that I could play it as Corsairs, I could play it as Craftworld, or I could play it as Drukhari. And then so obviously in 7th edition, they got a legit army. And then in 8th edition, they nuked them. Like Corsairs went away, and I sort of had to figure out what I was going to do with my army, but I could break it back down into the sort of core codices. So everything I do is just sort of trying to recreate that Corsair magic. So like in regards to my Craftworld army, it's very jet bike and vehicle based, and for my Drukhari, it's all about venoms. And Harlequins, they'll tag along with anybody. But so like when I started them, for example, actually with the Drukhari too, what I want is like a different flavor, and but I want it to complement the whole. So whatever I add, it fits cohesively with the core of my collection. And what that allows me to do is sort of nurse things along where I don't have to go whole hog and start like a completely new army. I can just add elements, and it can ride alongside my core army, which is usually pretty lean and mean. But yeah, so I try to add complementary pieces until something becomes a standalone army, and that's how I manage my Drukhari.
So it sounds like you have that theme of Corsairs, but essentially Corsairs, they don't exist anymore, sadly. But they could be they're Craftworld, they're Dark Eldar, they're Eldari, and it's almost like your army. And how long have you been working on this? It feels like it's just been evolving and just kind of grabbing a little bit here and there. It's just been expanding across current factions in 40K.
Yeah, I mean, really, I think I started it in like 2009 or something like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
And I really, for the longest time, I really just probably like 5 or 6 years, I did nothing but just paint Eldar. All in the sort of same scheme. And then I think like in late 7th edition, I started my World Eaters, and with like my World Eaters, and this is might answer your question like a little better. Like when you're going to start like a second army, like what are you trying to do with it? With the World Eaters, it was about berserkers and how to make berserkers work and do something unique with them. Like I wanted to, I wasn't just going to have like, a generic chaos army and a unit of Khorne berserkers. Like, no, I wanted a legit World Eaters army with a really sort of unique presentation. So, I went with the Storm Eagle as the main delivery system for like a huge unit of berserkers with Karn and an exalted champion. And while unfortunately flyers have sort of lost a good deal of their survivability, what I ended up doing is like, no, I still want to do that, because like I had the whole like concept for that World Eaters army was sort of like a air cavalry thing. So I have like warp talons and raptors and things like that. And I didn't want to go away from that just because it wasn't optimal anymore. So I incorporated some like renegade knights into that build. And so, I mean, the combination is pretty sick. Like you cannot ignore these knights, and Chaos Knights are pretty damn good right now. So the main thing of it was I wanted the arm to scream World Eaters, but have a sort of unique presentation.
And then it sounds like that was an army that you started and finished, and then you ended it. And you haven't been adding to it, but it was kind of like it's the theme. You met the theme, and that army's done. I mean, it's safe to say it's finished now? Yeah,
it's definitely finished. And, I can just add stuff or tweak things, like, when the additions change or, when the meta changes or whatnot. But, that army is going to roll out just like my Eldar armies have. Like, this is the concept for it, and I'm just going to make that concept work come what may. And that's something I really enjoy, and that keeps me inspired just in regards to painting and staying active in the hobby. Like, this is the theme, I'm sticking to it, and I really enjoy that.
I guess let's move into kind of planning an army. I don't know about you, but I have a lot of plans that are half-baked or half-finished, or I may have purchased a single box, or, in the case of Thousand Suns, it's about 75% completed. When you're planning an army out, I always find exactly kind of what you talked about, Alex, is let's think of a theme here and kind of set limits. Because if you're just like, I just want to start X army, and you just start building things, it's kind of like, okay, where do you stop? Where do you end? What are the first steps of it? So, for example, the Marine Army, I'm working on a Marine Army right now, and there's moments where I think to myself, Marines are a deep, dark hole. Chaos is a deep, dark hole that you may never get out of. It's just one more thing after the other. With Knights, it was easy because it had, there's only so many Knights you can build. You magnetize them, and maybe you add a Forge World Knight. AdMech was fairly new. There's only so many limited units you could build, so I kind of slowly grew into there. But with Marines, I'm finding I'm having to focus on Primaris. Like, I'm going to build a Primaris Marine force, and it's going to be, right now, I've decided it's going to be Alpha Legion, but it's Primaris for Marines, Alpha Legion. So I have all the Alpha Legion decals. It's going to it's going to look like a normal, Primaris army, but I'll have Alpha Legion markings. So that's kind of the theme, so that it can kind of be anything, but it's also kind of focused on this Alpha Legion theme. But until I get to the point of being inspired by not only what's the scope of the army, but how am I going to paint it? How am I going to base it? What's the theme going to be? Until I have all that kind of figured out in my head, it's still just kind of an idea or a kernel of an idea. And I like to kind of think through and figure all that out before I get started, because I know that if I just go out and buy a box of models, like at one point I'm like, oh, I'll run Death Watch. So I bought some Death Watch stuff, and I'm like, I don't know. I lost interest real quick. So I don't know about how you guys plan an army out, but for me, I feel like I need to have thought through a lot of stuff, not just what the models are, but also what are they going to look like? What's the theme going to be? What's the limit there? And finally, how am I going to paint and how am I going to base this thing? Once I have all that, it feels okay. I can kind of move along with it. But until you get to that point, it feels like you could easily just sort of just spin out and just paint a little bit here, paint a little bit there, and not really get anything done.
Yeah. I mean, I'm like my primary sort of passion in life is writing. And so I'm like no I'm no stranger to planning. And I actually enjoyed like the planning stage, especially as a 40K player.
Oh yeah.
And like I'm a pretty visual guy, and I spend a lot of time planning my army. And usually like the sort of inspiration I get is something that I saw, from I'm pretty old school, so a lot of it was like White Dwarf. Like I saw an awesome army in White Dwarf, and that's one of the reasons I still enjoy White Dwarf whenever I pick it up. Like I really love the features they do on just like fan armies. And there, like back in the day, there was this Sam Han army that was featured where all the aspect warriors were painted in red, and that was like I was like, holy shit. Sorry, do we swear on this podcast?
We don't, but I can bleep it out. Keep going.
Okay, sorry about that. But
good job, Alex.
Yeah.
This isn't our show.
I know.
Watch your manners.
So, like, even the Phoenix Lords were painted in red and white, and they looked amazing. And I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do. And, like, the jet bike thing was hugely inspiring. And that was sort of my guiding light for my Eldar going forward. I was like, yeah, I want to be fast, fluid, just mechanized or on jet bikes, everything. And so there's usually a visual component, and I spend like a lot of time looking at bits and kit bashing options and things like that. So even with like my World Eaters, I got like a lot of chain swords and close combat weapons from the Warp Talons kit or the Raptors kit. And actually those legs really went a long way to making the old school Berserkers look cool. So there's a visual component of it, and I just sort of keep looking until I figured out exactly sort of what I'm going to do visually with the army. But in terms of like tabletop application, it's really simple. I'm going to do 2 builds, one that has more anti-tank and another that has more anti-infantry, and that's all I do. I figure out the visual thing, and that's usually the longest bit, and then I come up with a couple of army lists, really just 2. One that has more anti-tank, one that has more anti-infantry, and that's like my goal. Like once I get to that point, I'm done and I start playing games.
Are you worried about like assault versus shooting, or are you trying for more of a balanced toolboxy list, or
always balanced?
How are you? Okay.
Yeah, Brian knows how I roll in this regard. Like, especially as an Eldar player, if you're not doing melee, you're not. I really don't think you're getting the most out of your army. I also think it's extremely boring. Just like shooting the crap out of people. It's not fun. Like, it's not fun for you. It's not fun for your opponent. And I just, it's the Corsair player in me. I love those sort of daring raids, and it's really not that daring if you're just hanging back at 36 inches shooting the crap out of your opponent game after game after game.
Well, and I mean, even if you're not a primarily assault army, you need some counter melee, so it makes sense to build I like the idea of just here's 2 lists, or here's 2 boxes of units that are, one's a little more anti-tank, one's a little more anti-infantry, but they're, I have a mixture of shooting and melee, and there you go.
You guys want to hear a pro level shameless plug?
Yeah, go ahead.
And if you really wanted to hear some additional thoughts on balanced armies and the importance of melee and assault for Craftworld Eldar armies, you could check out episode 86 of Splintermind, the Dark Eldar podcast that sometimes talks about Dark Eldar, and our thoughts on Eldari Assault, and the importance of incorporating melee into your list.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you could make it work, you two could be a Sean Naden who, but again, he's so far beyond a player.
I can't be a Sean Naden.
No one can. Only Sean could be Sean.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like the fact that he's just I'm an elf and I want to punch you, and I'm like, okay, well that's his theme.
That's how he rolls.
Yeah. So Brian, what about you? How are you
my God.
roughly planning out an army? I mean, when do you? I guess more like the idea for an army, and you're like, when's the inspiration, and Quinn, what's your process for like, yes, I want to start this. You're starting Harlequins now. Was it just because you've been talking about Harlequins on your show for?
Little column A, little column B on that one. Yeah. So here's the thing. While you guys have been talking about this process, I think I've been biting on a strap of leather over here because it's just. So there's a funny thing in my head where I grew up in a very blue collar household, right? Like my dad grew up in a logging camp in the Sierra Nevada mountains, right? My grandmother was like the nurse, so it's like I fancy myself being this very blue collar, thing, and like deny the fact that my approach is probably a little more artistic, than any sort of a planner. So I'm a teacher. So what I do for a living, there is so much meticulous planning that goes on, but the way that I teach, like any teacher that watches me or like administrators, they always like marvel how I'm willing to just jump from one thing to the next or adjust on the fly and do these things. Like the planning, I think, has to be there to a certain degree, but in the end, I end up using a little more of a artistic sort of approach and touch. So one of the things that when I was listening to that, well, two things. One, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot to have like 8,000 points of 30K world eaters too, but nobody wants to hear Ryan owns one more army. And the second thing is, I really disagree with the point that you have to stop, that your collection needs an ending point. And not because I think you should just always keep buying things. It's that my process doesn't have an end point in mind necessarily to start out. So for me, I will be interested in, so my current Craft World Eldar Army started because in 4th edition, I want to say, when the current Rangers came out, there was one of the Farseer models and the plastic Wraithlord. Those models, I was just like, those models speak to me. They're freaking awesome. But I didn't know what I wanted to do around them. And so, I built them, put some paint on it, stripped it, didn't like it, painted some Guardians, didn't like it. Like it just didn't really call to me. But in the meantime, I just kept, whenever like a lot of stuff would come up, like, oh, there's 30 Guardians. Okay. I don't know that I have a use for those, but I'm going to take them just to kind of have it. Because for me, like I will sit down, I don't plan out bits. I don't go onto a bit site and say, let's see what's available and figure out what I can do. I'm one of those where, it's probably from me as a kid growing up playing with Legos. I want to dump all of my stuff on the floor and look at it, and just combinations will just start to click in my head, if that makes sense. And so like kit bashing to me, sometimes people will look at it and say, oh, wow, it looks like it comes really naturally. Well, it does, but it's not, I can't do the Alex approach where I look at things and look on a site and say, oh, I think I can use this with that, because the scales sometimes can be so different on these things.
Yeah,
and like,
for sure.
I will see combinations of things and an idea for an army will pop up, and then I'll get inspired and I'll run in that direction. So like, as a recent example, I had a Beast Pack or Beastmaster for Drakari, and I looked at it and I was like, I looked at the torso from the Rack Venom pilot, who doesn't have the hump on the back and has like exposed whatever. And I looked at those two models and I was like, wait a minute, what if I put that torso on the lower half of the Beastmaster and made like a Coven looking, Beastmaster, and it really worked. It like really worked. And I converted it to where there were like some of the Talos bits that were hanging off, like the Kronos tentacles and things like that. It looks very Coven, even though it's a witch cult unit. And then I was like, well, wait a minute. What if I just come up with a whole, I was like, I can take the Chimera and I can cut off their heads and use the front bit from the Ecker injector from the Talos. Like that has like a sort of like a rounded head on it with a couple of little fingers that almost look like fangs coming off of it. And then I can like modify these to look like Chimera that have been modified by Covens. Then I was like, well, wait a minute. What if we take a witch cult that, wants to pay the ultimate price and basically goes to the homunculate, goes down to a Coven and says, whatever the price, And so it's like, you can have this very like ugly thing, but it requires bits from both lines to do. Now, is there a start and an end point for that? There's an entry point for me to get it on the table. I'm probably going to have to work it in initially with the Vanguard detachment, right? I can take 2 units of mandrakes, convert, which somebody had given me, Jody in my local group had given me the, God, what is the AOS model from White Tower or Silver Tower? Was it like the Tenebral Shard or something like that? That can be a male succubus very easily, right? But you can convert it, get rid of the face, put on like a rack faceplate, and now all of a sudden it looks like this mutilated thing that's been modified by covens. That can be the HQ for it. And then you take a beast pack, which only the Beastmaster counts as a choice in that. You have 3 elite units, I can put it on the table. Now, if I look at that and decide, okay, I want to make the permuted blades like a full army, now I can go in and do witch cults if I want to. But I don't go into it saying, I'm going to make this detachment and it's going to play this way, and then I'm done. Yeah. You know, I look at modeling first. I look at the parts that I have on hand and basically kind of paint what I want to paint initially, and then figure out what's the quickest way to get this on the table. And if I like it and I have fun with it and I'm still enjoying playing it, then it will organically just sort of grow on its own. But that process requires, like, Alex, Alex would have an aneurysm if he came to my house and looked at my backlog because he would just be like, what? There's no plan. And I'm like, no, there is no plan, because tomorrow I might wake up and decide this is a thing that I want to do. And I want to be able to go into my basement. I'll picture the bits in my head that I need because I've seen them, I've physically held them and, organized them. And I'm going to run with it and do that until it isn't entertaining anymore. So for me, there's no end point for an army, because it can end now, and 3 years from now, I could look at it and say, ooh, it'd be really good to add to this. I'd like to explore this idea. And so,
the best army is the one you can get on the table. And I guess really the easiest way to do that is a single detachment. So an allied detachment or a detachment of something. Yeah. So, if you run Eldar and you say, I want to try out Harlequins, maybe you want to play around with the Solitaire. Well, take a Vanguard, and the Solitaire with 2 Death Jesters and a Shadow Seer, and boom, you've got yourself kind of a fun little. But yeah, I guess the simplest way to get, to me, I think the best army is the one you can play with. You start at the detachment level, that's the easiest. But if you don't actually have complementary pieces, then you have to go to the 2,000 point army level. And I think it's trickier for me. So like the 1,000 Suns, I don't have any other chaos. That one's stalled out much easier versus I can work on my AdMech because I had knights to fall back on. I had my main army that I could build a detachment, and then the detachment, I like what you're saying, Brian, is it can grow. Once you have something, if you like it, you can just kind of keep adding to it. And Alex, you're kind of like you're the ultimate example of that, where your detachments have grown into whole wings of different chunks of this Corsair theme that you've been working with.
Yeah.
One thing
I mean,
if I can just throw this out really quickly, though, I do want to, I almost swore, I caught myself. I would like to point out the weaknesses of my approach, though, is that I struggled. I had to go through recently and completely redo my Coven stuff because it was no plan going into it. My 30K World Eaters army is very much like that. Like, I have 9,000 points worth of the stuff painted. I don't have a great functional army because at the time when I was painting that, the Plastic Heresy stuff hadn't come out yet. And so it wasn't that accessible to people. And it was just, I'm painting stuff just because it looks cool. And so like, that is definitely the weakness of my approach, is that because I paint things and do those things in that way, now that I have an established collection, it's a little easier to plug something in because I can tweak things in my list to make it feel like if this is replacing something else that I've been playing with, so I can adjust that this is my new fast cav anti-infantry harassment unit or whatever it is. But the problem is, like, for starting an army the way that I just described, it would be a nightmare. But my armies tend to be like my Imperial Guard army is the first squad, first platoon was my original box of Cadians that I bought in 1994. You know what I'm saying? Like, my collections span decades. And so I had the luxury of being able to sort of fudge it and make it work. But if you were starting out, I don't think my approach is going to work that well for people. If you're just sort of like casually dipping your toe in and you're like, I'm going to spend no more than $400 on this army and I want something that plays. You can't do what I'm talking about.
No.
It's just sadly,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in regards to like, I don't really have an endpoint for my Eldar. I mean, the guys like in my group and even like my buddies online, they're like, dude, are you ever going to stop with this? Like, I can't believe you're adding like more to your Eldar. Like, why don't you like do something with your World Eaters? And, like, so for me, the only real difference between like me and Brian is that I don't buy more than I can paint. And so like, for example, like my Alatok themed like sub army, it's not even a sub army. It's like a standalone army. It's like 3,000 points or something at this point. That just started by like me painting my Rangers all in black. And when I recognized that there was a chance to build that into like a unique army unto itself, I'll just go out and just buy a few more things to add to that until it basically grew. Because it basically started off as a battalion's worth of Rangers, and I was like, man, this like looks like it's its own thing. Like, why don't I paint like my why don't I paint some Warwalkers in black? Why don't I paint like I have like 5 Hornets? Why don't I paint a couple of those in black? You know.
Yeah. And it makes sense too, because the Warwalkers can, they outflank. So it's kind of like the theme is hiding and waiting and ambushing or something like that.
Yeah. And so like, and for me, like, so I painted up like, 2 units of 10 striking scorpions, and I have Dark Reapers in there because they sort of like, because they're Corsair themed, they're like all kit bash. They're not like real Dark Reapers. But it feels like, night fighting commando team with missile launchers like camped out in the woods, and so, like, then when I dip my toe into Drukhari, I have, like, my Kabalite stuff. And when I started with Drukhari, it was back when they were one unified whole. And so you could fill out a Force Org chart with, witches and Kabalites. So I had, like, some jet bikes. And when the new Drukhari book came out in 8th edition, I was like, oh, man, witch cults are their own thing now. I'm going to take this this witch cult element of my army and push this forward to be a standalone army. So, it's like I have like a battalion of witch cult. I have a battalion of Kabalite. I have more than a battalion of Kabalite stuff. An entire list for an Alatok themed army. And then my Lions of Asurian, my sort of like main army it's huge for my craft rolled Eldar. And I have like a separate build for that where I can break it down into a Wraith Host style build. So like my thing is like I really am not going to probably stop until I have every flavor of Eldar represented on the board, and then I'm going to start adding super heavies.
Yeah, well, I mean they have plenty of units, right? You pick something that it'll be hard to run out of. Like say you're a Chaos fan, you're not going to run out of stuff to build and paint for Chaos like ever. I don't. I think that's all you painted for the next decade. I have a feeling you would never run out.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of like you go, oh, go ahead, Brian.
Oh, no. Sorry. Finish that thought. I just remembered something that happened yesterday that I need to do to sort of like
that the whole thing.
Give an example of my process.
Yeah. Well, but it's, I guess it goes from detachment to 2,000 point army to, okay, I want to have some variations in the army because the army plays this way, but maybe I want to add a unit here or there to kind of strengthen this or change the play style a little bit to, I just keep going, and until there are no more units and there's a rule of 3 that kind of prevents me from having more than that. Yeah. But yeah, at that point, I mean, the great thing about having an army or two is you can look at it and go, you know what, I want to build a little bit on this army, or I want to build a little bit on this army, and you can bounce back and forth. But you just need to get something that you can play, and once you get that, then you got plenty of time to build from there. And although I've found that. I looked at my Eldar that I first started the game with 6 years ago. I was going to take some of them to the Las Vegas Open, and I'm like, I need to repaint these guys because my skill has gotten a lot better. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you have the weird, like if you have armies for a long, long time, you may do like reclamation projects where you're like, okay, I need to go back and re-clean all this up because I'm a better painter and I want to change this, but that's actually kind of a luxury to have that, to be able to go back and say, yeah, it's time for me to clean some of this stuff up because I'm a better painter now.
I'm all about it. Brian is too. I mean, I actually enjoy doing that. Like you can do it in just little chunks, and especially if there's like a lull where you feel comfortable with what you're playing with on the table. And so like, for example, I wrote out like the first like half of 8th edition just using Drukhari and my Latok themed Eldar Army while I repainted all of the craft world elements of my Lions of Assyrian. And there's many opportunities during an edition to sort of go revisit things. I'm probably not going to do that again. Like, I'm very comfortable with the way everything looks now. But yeah. I mean, there's plenty of opportunities to dive back in and sort of rehab a bunch of stuff or just spruce it up or bring it up to that next level.
So for me, the thing that I'd forgotten about that I was going to add in, this happened yesterday. So Friday night, I went onto Facebook, and my hometown in Central California, in Modesto, California, there's a store that popped up in the like gaming had been dead there. Like like after I moved from there, 20 years ago, the main store that was there, the Gauntlet, which was an awesome place to play. Like, that is really where I learned how to like play pickup games and not just with my buddies in a garage kind of a thing. Great community. And when that store closed down, that area had like a good 10, 15 years of just no viable stores that supported tabletop gaming. And now Utopia Games, which is there, Brian, who runs that store, has just done an amazing job with it. And he had posted, because they're struggling, of course, with the whole lockdown thing. And so they're doing like curbside pickup Monday through Friday. And to kind of juice up interest, he put 2 boxes up on Friday. And I didn't see this until the night. It was the most recent Space Wolves Battle Force box, the one with like the Flyer, the Wolf, Primaris, and the Iron Priest. And then the Dark Eldar APOC box, which is, the 15 Wraithguard blades, two Wraith Lords, and a Spirit Seer.
Oh, the Craftworld.
He put those, the Craftworld one, He put that one up, and it was $99.99. And I commented on it like, oh my word, I can't believe I missed this, blah, blah, blah. And Brian messaged me and said, hey, look, I'll honor the price, and I told him, look, it's going to be a pain, but, my buddy John, who lives in the area still can pick it up, pick it up for me. And he went for it. So this is one of those examples, like I was talking about, where all of a sudden an opportunity pops up and will spark creativity. So one of the ideas, I'm not sure that I'm going to run with this, but one of the ideas that I'm toying with is, because visually I like the idea of it. I'm not a giant lore junkie. Like, I don't, I'm not one of those guys that I'm like, well, actually, the Abrasive Craft World has a majority. So I'm going to take 3 units of 10 Banshees. Like, no, I get it. I read the lore just enough to make sure that I'm not like being a complete jerk when I make my army, and I want the army to look correct. But I like playing with interesting themes and things like that. And when I was looking at this box, I'm like, there's 2 Wraith Lords in it. And I was like, well, what if I took the Spirit Seer in the box, combined it with like the Mistweaver model from the Silver Tower thing, and now it looks like kind of a floaty, Harlequin-ish looking Spirit Seer. Yeah. And then I convert the 2 Wraith Lords, and I could, pick up a third one into and make an Onslaught detachment of 3, because back in the day in Rogue Trader, you did have Eldar Dreadnoughts that you could use in a Harlequin army. So just 3 Wraith Lords painted up in Harlequin colors. And that's just a detachment that I can sprinkle in. Now, that's one of those where I'm going to have to look at that and figure out how to make that work. Like, how are 3 Wraith Lords and a Spirit Seer going to work in a Harlequin army? Because they're going to look goofy as hell if I just tack that onto a Dark Eldar army. But it's a modeling thing, and then which turns into a modeling and painting challenge, and then a gaming challenge. And so when you have a massive, 8,000, 10,000 point army, you start doing goofy stuff like that just to sort of like get your creative juices going. And it's like, you can only assemble so many Kabbalite warriors in stock configurations before you're like, oh, I want to go like full Sky Serpents and work in Dark Eldar or Dark Elves, Corsairs, cloaks, and things like that to make a theme and do it. And in that way, it's like you're keeping your army, it's like a relationship that's kept fresh. It isn't just the stale, oh, we're eating chicken and potatoes again tonight with broccoli. All right. Tacos on Tuesday. Okay, dear. Like, it's not that kind of a thing. It's like, this is like a fresh, exciting thing that you get to do and find new ways to express it. And again, that only works if you have a massive backlog of bits and all those sorts of things that if you get this wild idea that you want to do something, you can hop in, dive in and do it. And, if I get inspired by that, then maybe I do like a Vanguard detachment and do like the dual bladed ones, Wraith Blades, and make a detachment of a counts as, Craft Worlds, but it's Harlequin themed to use alongside it. And that's how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the visualizing how it looks on the table is kind of the thing. I like to sit back and say, okay, when I put this entire army on the table, whatever configuration of detachments or allies or whatever, how is it going to look? And Alex, you kind of you've solved that by yours all have a consistent theme. You use bits across the model ranges, right, for the Dark Eldar Craft World pieces of it for your Lions of Assyrian. So you actually have a really nice, coherent, visually looking army across multiple books, basically.
Yeah, and I mean, that's like one of the reasons why I do take a lot of time in the planning stage to look at things and make sure it all works. Because if I can't replicate the look, it sort of excludes me from doing it on the tabletop. I'm just not going to do it if it doesn't look right.
Yep.
So, I mean, like, I'm very pragmatic with like my list building and all of that kind of stuff, but I'm really just driven visually.
Yeah.
And if I can't repeat the process, I'm going to end up in a place where I'm really frustrated. And, like just the way I sort of operate in regards to the game in general is just sort of like avoiding frustration. I don't I get frustrated by sort of like distraction projects. Cause I did go through a phase where I did a bunch of really stupid projects and painting, just stuff that I wish I hadn't have spent time doing, and I rushed through things that I really did like, models that I loved and models that I wanted to be showcase models, and they weren't. And it was just like, that was the one time I sort of did that since I got back into the game, and I really paid the price for it. So it took me maybe almost like 2 years to get everything back to where I wanted it to be. Just because, I have limited time,
Yeah.
So
because ultimately we all do, right? That's our limiter.
Yeah.
I mean, some of us, obviously budget is another one, but time and money are the two things essentially that are, as we get older, we make more money, we have less time. And unfortunately that's, you have to spend it wisely.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, when I'm playing in games, and I know that I'm not playing the list I really want to play because I was screwing around at the painting desk. That's wicked frustrating. And then then it creates pressure to, man, I really got to crank through those units that I do need to paint. It's like, look, if I want to enjoy this army, I need to have these units painted. And for me, that was like Wind Riders and Shining Spears. Like, I don't care that Wind Riders aren't, the best. I know Guardians are easier to use. They're cheaper, blah, 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 blah. But it's not what I wanted to do. And so, not having that stuff dialed and working on other projects prevented me from getting that list on the table. And when that's like your core army, that's a bad place to be in. And it's just, you're not really enjoying the game when you're not playing the army that you love the way that it's meant to be played. And I just don't want to be in that position. So I just try to do everything I can to avoid that feeling. And that's probably why I'm, as positive as I am in regards to the hobby, because I sort of avoid those pitfalls as much as possible.
Yeah. So I used to build plastic models, and I did for a while, but honestly, I never finished any of them because, when you're building a Star Trek model, for example, you're not playing that, you're not, you're going to get a game in. And 40K is unique in that the things that we build and we paint, we play with. And that playing is a sort of a motivator to do something and to complete an army, to finish an army. And I know there's people that are just happy playing with gray plastic, or they put very minimal effort into it. But for the most part, I think a lot of people want to have their army look at least decent or presentable. And that's kind of what we're talking about, is like, how do you get that thing in order to play with this army? And I know there's people that will paint just to paint, and those are, that's a whole nother level here. But I think the three of us are all, and Brian, you mentioned it, sometimes it's hard to be motivated right now in the moment we're in, because we can't play with the things that we're painting.
Right.
So we could paint all this stuff, but I can't play with it. And unfortunately, I can't take it down to my Thursday night league and try it out, because it's not going to hit the table for quite a while, or we don't actually know when it's going to hit the table. We're not sure.
Right.
So I kind of think that, doing some test models is really interesting. Alex, you talked about getting kind of the paint scheme down or avoiding frustrations. And Brian, you're an experienced enough painter. I feel like you can probably pull off different painting techniques. But I mean, how long does it take to kind of get this is how I want to paint this army or this model, and I want to carry this theme across?
When I go to paint a model for the first time, so like I'm trying to think of what I don't know. I know you've had Colin on, and Colin will talk about the same thing where it's like, I'm painting a black. What kind of a black am I doing? Is it a warm black? Is it a cold metallic hard black? So like I have so many of those recipes in my head ready to roll. Yeah. That you just sort of, after a while, you just sort of start getting a feel for the sort of spatial relationship between colors next to each other, and like I jokingly put a sticker from like Green Stuff World, the little like color wheel thing they have is like sitting on my desk as a joke. And I put it there because I had no way to use it, because I'm such a one-trick pony that even when I paint warm colors, I find a way to shade them with purple and make it cold. And so, so for me, it's like I have so much experience that like a project that I know will be coming up eventually is I'm going to paint, the Skitarii kill team that came with the original kill team box. Mm-hmm. And even though I've never painted one of those models before, I know the spacing of where you need to have a lighter color to contrast with the darker ones, like you need to make sure there's a clean demarcation where there's, a value change between those two different things. And so it's pretty rare that I go to paint a model and look at it and go, no, that's not going to work. So for the most part, it's like in my head, I'll look at a few different examples of things that other people have done, and I'll figure out what works for me and what doesn't. And pretty much I'll nail stuff first time. I mean, recently I messaged Colin with this, and it was kind of funny. He laughed. He was like, wow, that must be really weird. I went to paint a terrain piece, and when I started painting it, one of those like plasma thermic relays or whatever, like the little like generator thing with the platform on it. Yeah. I went to paint that thing and looked down, and I was like, this is terrible. And I was confused because I was like, no, I paint terrain and I have recipes for everything. Why didn't this work? And that's, I joke that that's what people must feel like when they paint stuff. But for me, mostly it's like, I know stuff that works. So when I go to paint a new model, it's pretty rare, except for Harlequins. But Harlequins would, that was a thing where I was just really overthinking it. And then once I went back to how would I do this using known my known tricks that I do, then all of a sudden, boom, it clicked and it made sense. And then a pandemic broke out, and that army won't get painted until we go outside again.
I mean, there's painting an individual model, and then there's painting in volume to get an army done, So Colin showed me a little bit on how to paint an Alpha Legion sort of sheen over a Marine. So, it involves zenithal highlights with some silver and some inks and different shades of inks. And then you get this really cool, like that weird purple to turquoise sort of effect of their army. And so I learned to do that. And I painted up a unit of infiltrators, and I painted some eliminators, and then painted some suppressors. But every time I do it, I get more and more efficient. So the steps of how to do it, okay, I paint this first, then this, then this. Those steps become more and more efficient. So I'm not duplicating efforts. Yeah. And so now I have 30 intercessors that I'm about to start. And then, I mean, that's a lot, but I have a feeling like by now I've worked down the process of how to get this out, like the assembly line process of how to get this done in the most efficient way possible. Right. So there's painting, and then there's painting efficiently. And the more you paint, the more you start to realize, okay, I can do this here, I can do that there. Yeah. I don't need to do this. This works fine just here.
Well, and that's the thing too, like, not only so in doing that, you've developed a new technique that you've used, and now you're getting more efficient at doing it. Well, imagine, I mean, if you do that all the time, you get to a point where all of your techniques are, even when it's a new one, it's a variation on an old technique. And so the efficiency, once you learn how to become an efficient painter, I mean, that's a whole episode unto itself, but once you learn how to be an efficient painter, you were always an efficient painter. Yeah. So like there was that community article yesterday where they were talking about prolific painters, and they showed these 4 people, and they were like, so-and-so finished 100 models last year. And I was like, last 7 of which were vehicles. And I'm like, vehicles are easier than infantry, like that sounds impressive. Well, 100 models, yeah, and like, I mean, I aim for a pace of a model a day, averaging out at the end of the year. And like, I counted last night. I was like, well, I'm curious where I'm at, and I'm like, because this year I really feel like I'm slacking. I finished 86 models this year, and I have 26 that I just have to do the bases on, and they're done. It's like once you, and this isn't like, oh, look at me, I'm so fast and fancy. It's just once you develop a process for doing most things, it's pretty easy to tweak that process to do something that's slightly new, but new is usually just a variation on an old thing, unless it's like, what you're doing is a legitimately new process, right? Where it's like zenithal highlights with silver and then different inks to do a thing. But now that you've done that, you could do, a red metallic, a red ink over metallics, Thousand Suns army for 30K and not have a problem with it. Like once you did one or two, it would be an efficient, quick process.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, and I think with the Marine Army, I'm using weathering powders on the bases for the first time. And it helps because the more techniques you add to your tool belt, the more you can take on a second, third, fourth, fifth army, and really go into that. And also, like we talked about, like do a reclamation project on an old army and go, I really want to change this a little bit to go here or this direction. So let's talk about purchases, because obviously this is the expensive part of building an army. Alex, you are very disciplined. You sound like you're one of the few people that buys and builds and paints before you buy something else. Is this correct?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, I do have like a backlog of stuff, but it's like really, really minimal. And a lot of times, like, that backlog just doesn't really get taken care of just because I'll strip something, base coat it and just wait for the opportunity to actually paint it. But, it's just, I don't have a lot of money to play around with. And like, I don't, like I was saying about like, sort of like a no regrets kind of guy. And I just don't want to feel like I had wasted my money on something that I'm never really going to use or not enjoy painting. And so like my general rule is just like when I did my Shining Spears, for example, I just got all the stuff to do my Shining Spears and that was it. You know what I mean? I just bought the kits I needed. I didn't buy anything else until I was almost done with them. So, I'll buy something, like a week or two or even, a month in advance. Like, so I was, doing Wind Riders after that. So like, I bought like a couple boxes of Wind Riders, like when I was getting to the end of the road with my Shining Spears and just had them waiting. And so, I didn't really get anything until after that. I know like, people really struggle with that in regards to the hobby. It's just something I've not struggled with. I mean, I've been at the point where I had no models to paint before, and I'll probably get to that point again. And that's not me like showing off. That's just the way I do things. And I'd rather just buy what I know I'm going to use.
Yeah. Brian, what about you? How much of a unpainted or unbuilt backlog do you have?
Oh, it's the stuff of nightmares, but it's also the stuff of dreams. Yeah. So, and because like I said, anytime that I go, and another reason for it too, is that like when I was talking about opportunity, driving creativity and, things like that, because creativity for me comes from all of a sudden having a new set of circumstances, that tweaks and you have to adapt. And, and this is that thing, like I was talking about with my teaching, where I can have all the great plans, there are set things, I don't just go in there and freewheel it. Like there are concepts that need to be taught that day in macroeconomics, if I'm talking about the Federal Reserve, but that, oh, wait, somebody asked a question or they don't quite understand this thing. Now I get to go do this other thing. And like you come up with stuff on the fly. It's the same thing for me with collecting. And so I will, like my Chaos Army that I have, like I have a big Chaos backlog, but a lot of it is stuff that I traded for a giant Chaos lot for some stuff from an AOS project that didn't work out. And so I am totally okay with this massive backlog of things that I'm not necessarily going to do, because sometimes I'll look down at stuff. And like right now, there was a Soul Grinder in this giant Chaos lot. And I'm like, I'm never going to do a Chaos Demons army. I don't like them. I don't care. I don't want them. My World Eaters army is, I jokingly call it my 31K, like just into the Eye of Terror. So I don't have like a bunch of possessed and weirdness. And I have a lot of leftover heresy parts for my 30K army. Yeah. So they're sort of in that light. But So I looked at it and I was like, wait a minute, what if I, for my death guard, and I like snapped off the torso of the demon thing, and then I pulled over a bloat drone and set it on top there and went, well, why don't I make a death guard defiler that is unique, but requires multiple kits? But these aren't like, I didn't go out and buy a soul grinder kit and then buy a bloat drone kit. Like, this was leftover stuff from trades or starter boxes that I never did. So I don't want to make it sound like I just go and buy 10 of everything and then just cut them up and throw them into a blender and then go, oh, look, I can make a Guardian with a banner. That's, I'm not using like $90,000 worth of kits to make one 8-point model or something like that. But for me, it's just, and I think that comes from having a large older collection, is that I've just accumulated bits over the years, and like, you'll get in a trade, you'll get models, and some of them are just so jacked up that you're like, I can use the heavy bolter from that Predator and that's about it. The rest of it is terrain, so that's, for me, like, my backlog would scare most people, but my backlog isn't, I bought a ton of stuff and never painted it. It's, I've traded and got, picked up different lots, or like, this, you can say I just added 18 models to my Craftworld Eldar backlog, which was already considerable. Yeah. But for $99, it's $300 worth of models. So I didn't spend $305 retail for this thing. I got the whole thing for $99.99. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So but that backlog is the key really to how I put an army together, is that I need all those parts available. So all of a sudden I can just wake up in the middle of the night and go, wait a minute, what if and then bam, I have something to do instead of grinding my wheels and insomnia.
And that's kind of how, that sounds like you're inspired essentially by seeing the things you have on hand and sort of piecemealing them together or tweaking them or moving them around. And that's kind of how and it sounds like you've learned to work with that. You understand that's how your process works. Like right now you're working on Battlefleet Gothic, right? And that is, that's not your Harlequin army. That's not your Eldar army. Nope. But you're doing that because it's part of, you know this about yourself. Like, I will work on this because this is something that I'll be productive and I will do this and it will give me joy. And, I will eventually finish the Harlequin army.
It's the Ivan Drago school of army completion. I fight for me. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. And I guess the thing with building an army is when you're halfway through it, I mean, sometimes, like, I don't know about, like I said, I have some projects that I have just basically that have been shelved. I have a Death Watch, several boxes of Death Watch that I don't know when I'll get around to it. And I think before you start, you sort of have to consider, okay, how long will this take, and what will I not be doing while I'm creating this army? And once you have an army, it's easy to add a detachment because it's just the time commitment's very small, and you can add to it over time. But if you're really going for it, and like the Thousand Suns, I had no chaos to draw from. I didn't have any, was starting from scratch. It was really difficult to spend the time on that. And I kind of stalled out after 4 months or something of painting those guys because I just wasn't painting it very efficiently. And it was something that it wasn't something that came easily. And I just realized that, yeah, it's cool. I love Rubric Marines. I love the theory, the thoughts behind them, but it's not really my play style. It's not something I really enjoy. And I just, Eldar always call me back. There's a siren song that always calls me back. Oh, yeah. And I go, you know what? Gosh, I need some more Eldar. And so every time, and almost every single time. And it just happens. So it's very difficult to start a brand new project unless it has something that I understand. Okay, there's a limit to it, like 4 nights or an AdMech detachment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I had something like that with like my Dark Angels, and I'm definitely going to go back to Dark Angels. They were like the first models I ever got. Like I went to Eldar not long after, but it's like I have like a fully painted, Betrayal at Calth Dark Angels force with a few extra odds and ends, and that army will get done eventually. It's just you got to prioritize what you enjoy playing. And
that's a good point.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, it's all fully painted. They've got like Forge World shoulder pads, the whole 9 yards. And, Brian, he always sends me awesome stuff. So I have additional things to add to them. Like when I go to do the bikers and things like that. But, you can't go wrong with, spending extra time on your main army, because you're just increasing the sort of versatility of how you can play. And, that'll increase your enjoyment out of them.
Yeah. And it's a good point. I mean, if you don't enjoy the way the army plays, then you might be halfway through it and you might doing some kind of test games with some models or playing them around and go, I just don't enjoy this army. And that's kind of a sucky feeling if you've already sunk some time and money into it. But I don't know if that's ever happened to you. I mean, Brian, you have a Tau army that you've sort of acquired in trade. I don't know if you've actually ever played it though.
I have.
Yeah.
It's not fun. In fact, if anybody wants a really large, or like it hasn't been added to recently, but if somebody wanted a large, just contact me. I need to get rid of this damn army because I'm never going to use the bits for anything. I'm never going to use it's just got to go. Yeah,
that's a very hyper specific bit kit, unless it's it's terrain that things getting stomped on or whatever. No. Yeah, that makes sense.
No, it doesn't tie in with Imperial or Eldari, or it just needs to go.
Yeah,
but I mean, I do have like my Wraith Host build. That's sort of like that was just something I wanted to do. It's not like my preferred play style, but it's something I like trotting out every once in a while. Everybody knows I love the Axe and Shield Wraith Blades, and I think they're really good. But like with my Alatok army, for example, I did get to a point because, the Craft World army was so limited before Psychic Awakening, where that was all I was playing in regards to my Craft World army. Luckily, I had my Drukhari, which have been, brilliant all edition long. But, I do like playing that army. I love painting it. I like playing it, but I don't like playing it all the time. So I have been there, you know what I mean? It's like I have invested significant resources into that army, but it's not my preferred army. And you want to have your main thing ready to go. And that was a problem. But, while they were good, they carried me and gave me time to paint like all of my Lines of Assyrian stuff.
That's a good point. Yeah. I mean, your main army is your main army. Sometimes having a second army there are some people that are just sort of like everything, and they have mass collections and they sort of enjoy all facets of the game. But most people have a main army. And as long as you have the models to suit that, this is going back also, oftentimes when you decide on an army, if you're going out there and you're looking at you're starting on a list, like I want to build this list and this list is really popular list. It's winning tournaments. Here are the units that are really good right now. That is such a trap because by the time you build and paint and get those things on the table, that meta or those, those things that were really good, Games Workshop is changing things so quickly that those things won't hit the table, or you'll go, these weren't as good as I thought, or I really shouldn't have bought 3 Repulsor Executioners. That was only good for like a week. Things like that. You realize that was a really bad mistake on my part. So it's being tempted by whatever the new hotness is and just going in on only the good units, or, I want a really mass tournament list. It's fine if you're going to slap it together and play in an event or whatever, but if you want to own it as a collection, there's a certain amount of care and love. You have to like it. You have to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And that's the angle of Splintermind, right? Is that Alex and I both are collectors and we love these units and we're in it for the long haul. I'm not adding mandrakes because they're the new hotness, or there's, the ITC's changed to secondary. You know what I'm saying? Like if you're doing that, that's a whole different level and you're going to do what you're doing. But if you are doing a collection, like you are collecting Drukhari because you are in it to win it, you're going to paint those units and you're going to have, you'll have an edition where something is just absolute crap. I mean, look at I have 5 Talos with heat lances on them, for crying out loud. Now, if I had any sense and wanted to win games, I would snap them off and put haywire blasters or whatever the deal is. But I'm like, maybe they'll come around, because I mean, is my disappointment in their performance isn't enough for me to snap them off and do that, because I'm looking at, like you were talking about earlier, and I'm an econ teacher. I'm not completely a hippy dippy artist here. What's your opportunity cost? What is it going to cost me to sit down and snap those things off and repaint new ones and magnetize them? I mean, that is a lot of bandwidth when, hey, maybe I want to paint that second Chronos that's all converted up and dialed, because it's going to look good, and a double Chronos unit is actually kind of fun to play with, which I wouldn't have known if I hadn't gotten a wild, impulse to just convert it and try it out. And now I use those things in every single game when I've been bagging on the unit on air for like 2 years,
or you build Harlequin bikes with Haywire if you decide you need Haywire. I mean, maybe you don't.
It's better Haywire anyways. So
yeah.
That's why I sort of preach that thing of just like I have two lists. One with more anti-infantry, one with more anti-tank, because you can get that from like a variety of places. And being well rounded, like, my Lions of Assyrian, it's like, are Wind Riders great? No, but guess what? I'm not running into the same problem that a lot of tournament Eldar players are, where they get overwhelmed by numbers. It's like, I've put in the reps with those Wind Riders. I don't care that they're not the best unit going. They're more survivable than Guardians. They're faster. They have more shots, blah, 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 blah. And, they look awesome. And it's worth putting in those reps with units that are maybe not the flavor of the month. It's like Brian with his Talos. You know what I mean? Like when those do come around and the Heat Lancers are the optimal choice, because they will be someday, you're going to have like a wealth of experience under your belt. It's like Mandrakes. It's like I always think of Scary with his Mandrakes. He was like, you know what? These models are cool. I can use them to grab objectives in 7th edition. Are you kidding me? He was running like, 3 units of 3 or whatever it was. And look at him now. He's crushing it. He's like one of the best Drukhari players in the world. So, like me and Brian are definitely, in lockstep with this one is, do your thing, man. Learn how to make your stuff good, and don't abandon, your favorite army just because it's not in the greatest place. You'll improve so much as a player.
This edition does feel like an edition geared for the collectors. And I like the idea of calling it, we collectors. We collect these things. We don't build them just to play them and then dump them on eBay when they're no longer good. That's a whole nother level of whatever. I mean, if that's what you're into, that's fine. But this is a collector's edition of 40K in that, they have been actively working to tweak the balance of different units since the edition dropped. And if something's not good now, it might be good later. I think their goal is to really try to make everything useful. And you can get things to be useful, and maybe it's not completely optimized, but you can play things that you enjoy, and still, still get a lot out of it. And so, I agree. I think it's better to have a big collection, anyways, because at that point, as things kind of come and go, or as different tactics change, you can pull from your shelf and say, these Talos with Heat Lances, it's time to try these guys out again, because hey, the Heat Lance profile has changed. It hasn't, but if it does, it might be something worthwhile.
Right.
What is the Heat Lance profile, by the way? Something ridiculous.
It's not good. It's a strength 6 meltagun with like -5 AP, D6 damage at half range. You can roll 2 and take the highest.
Yeah,
but a strength 6 meltagun. It's like what are you going after? Because like multi-wound elite infantry are not toughness 3.
Yeah,
so you're not wounding anything on a 2. Yeah, it's in such a weird spot, and I'm just like, please, Games Workshop, if you could make the Heat Lance not the Heat Lance, I would really appreciate that.
But they will, and the benefits of having a collection that you enjoy is I can always go to my shelf of Eldar and go, you know what, I have a bunch of Wind Riders. If I wanted to try Wind Riders, I could try Wind Riders. If I don't, I can go back to the Wraith Host or whatever I want to play with.
I was going to say also that it's not just that you can run into a problem and fill a gap that's suddenly there if there's a rules change or whatever the deal is. Mm-hmm. Having the flexibility of the collection too is that I remember years ago, or a couple episodes ago, Tom Taylor Big asked me the question. He was like, "Why Coven? Why did you do it?" And then I realized it was because Kabbalite shooting, when the 5th edition Codex dropped, was so efficient that I wanted to do something different. Mm-hmm. But it's like I can play an all Kabbalite shooting army if I want to. Like it's there. I've got it in my collection. I can mix in elements, or I can go hard with that. And so you can run into a thing where if you run into a rut and you're like, oh man, I've been playing melee only, you can go with the balanced, or you can just swing hard. If you've been playing over here on the right, you can swing hard left and vice versa to try different things out. So having a diverse collection allows you to play the game in a lot of different ways. And per that social contract, if you're playing in a group where you have players that you know your army is a bad matchup, in a positive and negative way versus certain opponents and certain people's armies. And like, if you and that person want to have a good game, you can take something that's going to be a little more of a challenge or isn't going to get boat raced as hard, to make sure that you both have that nice edge and have a good, fun game, because I mean, I would rather lose a hard fought close game than boat race the hell out of somebody and have them just not have fun at all, but I'm like, hey, I was in control since turn 1 and turn 3, your models are all gone.
Yeah, that's not
Thanks
fun.
for playing. Like that's who wants to do that? It's awful.
Yeah. Having to apologize for your army is not fun.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I guess the idea of having the collection is always is just intriguing. And there's it's nice when you can pull from that to play the things that you want to play and also have the flexibility. And so it starts with a detachment. You build a detachment and then you go from there. You build an army. You have allies that you can kind of move into and out of. But I think it's why if you're an Imperium player, there are dedicated Imperium players. They have mass amounts of codexes they can pull from for their. Sure. We're gonna call it the collection, right? They have just tons of stuff. Eldar has tons of stuff, and Chaos is the same way. And orcs only have a single codex, but orc players. There's numbers. There's always numbers there for sure. So
and when you were talking about too with linking, Imperial players or Eldari players being able to add different flavors into it. I mean, a detachment could be as small, if you're doing a super heavy, it can be as small as a single model, or I mean, I don't count an auxiliary detachment as a real thing.
Sure.
Or it can be as small as like I was talking about that onslaught detachment that has four models in it total. So it can be. And those 4 models could spring into an entire, battalion if you want to at a certain point or a brigade. But it's just you can dip your toes into the water. And if you're doing allied stuff, it's just a lot easier to work it in. And being able to work it in and play it and not having this finish line that is so astronomically far, you aren't having to clear the Oort cloud to finally say hey, you've made it to your destination, as Voyager, like that's, that it's a little fun.
Yeah. It's not about getting distracted. And Brian, I know this is your
not that I would know anything about this.
It's your wheelhouse. So it's okay. So right now I'm in the middle of the Marine Army, and the great thing is I like that, COVID-19 it has hit lots of people in many different ways, but for a lot of us, like myself, it's kind of the, like you said, it's called the pause. Yeah. Things have sort of paused right now, and there's both good and bad that goes with it, but. This Marine Army, I've been really wanting to finish by summer. I want to complete this Marine Army, and I have a sense of exactly the limits of this for the first list that are going to hit the table. But as I build this Marine Army, there's all these siren songs that call to me, like, oh, I don't know, the new Elf Range and Age of Sigmar. Those things, what are they called again? The
Lumineth.
The Lumineth. Though I'm like, oh gosh, those Lumineth look really good. And I'm like, you know what? I'm probably going to have to buy into that. So there's these, or Harlequins, for example. I'm like, Harlequin bike unit would be really, really cool detachment again for my Eldar Army. But then I think, you know what I need to do? I need to get this Marine Army going quickly because I know these songs are calling. I want to have something that I can play when we come out of this, because otherwise I'll be distracted by these other things that might pull me away from it. And I don't want to get pulled away so much that it becomes an army that is half completed, that just kind of sits there, that I may never get back around to. So I guess, Brian, it sounds like, actually, you describe it, but it sounds like you kind of lean into it. The distractions that happen, you just kind of go with it, because if it's an inspiration, you just chase it until you go, okay, well, that was fun. I'm going to try this new thing over here.
Well, to do a callback to something you said earlier, you have to ask yourself why that distraction is happening sometimes. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the distraction, like you were talking about when you were working on your master's degree, where it was like, oh, wow, God, I really need to vacuum my house, you know? And it's like, no, you need to be working on your master's thesis, and like you're doing something to give yourself the illusion of productivity. But but that could be used in a positive way. So like all the things that I'm doing right now, you could argue that painting an Imperial Navy fleet is a distraction, which although I do have plans for games, like I'm going to play a campaign, I'm redoing my Drakari fleet immediately after this battleship's done. But for me, it's like that this distractions are only bad if they take you off target or off course from your main thing that you're doing. Mm-hmm. Like if they are negatively impacting, if you are vacuuming your house so much that your master's thesis never gets done, but like those little like mental health breaks are important. Yeah. But you just have to ask yourself why you're doing the distraction thing. Are you doing the distraction thing because you really want to paint this thing because it would be enjoyable to paint? I do so many cold palette models that it's like, I'm going to paint this ogre who has like a lot of, Maw Tribe's model that has a lot of like leather tones and things because I just need a break from painting magenta, turquoise, and red and orange shaded with purple, and that's fine if you're doing it for that reason. And, if it's like, if I need to take a break that's longer, like, okay, well, I need to paint like, a couple of units or multiple units, or maybe I just need to paint my ogres for a while. I don't have a set timetable for when this Drukhari stuff has to be done because my Drukhari army will never be done. Yeah. Like I can say that right now my collection's satiated. Like I can't imagine buying any new stuff for it. Yeah. But I have no illusion that I'll never buy a single model for this thing again because I might decide that there's a really interesting idea that I want to work with and run with. And so for me, if those distractions, ask yourself why you're being distracted. And sometimes like when I've told Alex before, like on the phone, I'm like, dude, I know I need to play games because I'm on eBay looking at models I'm on Forge World's site looking at some, like I'm looking for that fix that I'm playing or painting or making progress fix. But as long as you're doing it because you just need a break, like, that's painting. In the end, the army is not the goal, in a weird way. The army and the hobby is enjoyment when you really like render it down to its essential components. It's enjoyment. And if you are turning it into a source of stress, you're going to try to go vacuum your house instead of finishing your master's thesis. Yeah, that's good. So
it's a marathon, not a sprint, really. I mean, it's a lifelong thing, and just think of it as a lifelong thing.
Yeah, it's a lifelong journey.
Yeah, like I'm definitely more of like a marathon guy myself in regards to just like the hobby. Like my goal was sort of like I wanted to, because I'd see all these epic Space Marine armies, and I'm like, I want that, but for like an Eldar army. I don't have like the lore and all like the organizational stuff that is presented in the codexes for the Space Marines, but like eventually they sort of did in 7th edition and actually in the 8th edition codex for Eldar 2. But I was like, I want this like really big, versatile collection, but it's also very thematic and all of that stuff. But so the thing of it is that like I find I can sort of change gears by going to another aspect of my army. So like, for example, so like it is like a marathon for me. Like I have like this big vision at the end of the rainbow type of thing, but there's like little steps along the way where sometimes you do have to kick it up to a sprint. So for me, it was like, look, I have to get like my Lions of Assyrian, like the craft world element of it up and running. I'm not going to do anything until this is done. And that's like my strength as a hobbyist is like when I realize I'm like, yo, dude, like you haven't played this army in like, 2 years, or haven't played it in a viable, with a viable list in like 2 years. It's like, it's time. I will sit down and I won't do anything until it's done. But at the end of it, it's like, okay, well, I don't want to paint any more jet bikes. Like I want some Shuriken Cannon Wind Riders right now, but like I'm like, I'm sort of burned out on the jet bike thing. I'm going to add a little bit to my Wraith host because I did what needed to be done with the sort of Wind Rider host. Now I'm going to switch gears and go over to the Wraith host and shore that up because I've seen some opportunities to make some really exciting lists there, and then I can sort of go back. But I definitely eliminate those distractions, to a really solid degree. And it's like I said, it hurts my enjoyment of the game. Like when I'm playing lists that I don't like, or I just can't do what I want on the tabletop. That really frustrates me. And it's like Brian was saying, like, look, if you're feeling like frustrated because of the hobby, you're not enjoying it. And that's like the whole point of it. So it's like, that's like just my golden rule. I don't want to be frustrated. So I just, I don't like dip my toe into other things until I'm done with what I really want to do. And plus I also have like other, it's like, I have like my job. I'm like also like a writer. So I get like my creativity out in other ways. And that might be something, unique, to me and, other people who also have like other art type projects outside of 40K. So that could be a sort of aspect of it too. But I definitely can go into sprint mode when a project needs to be completed. Like perfect example is actually Drukhari. Like once I started, once I was on our show full time, when 8th edition dropped, I was like, no, I'm not doing anything until my Drukhari are done. And I crushed through getting my Drukhari ready for 8th edition. Like I looked at the index. I'm like, okay, what do I have? What do I need? What needs to be repainted? And I was like, before the codex came out, I was done, and like the codex came out like, I don't know, 3 months after the index. So,
it was way longer after that.
Was it? I thought we were, I'm thinking of the Craft World Codex that came out.
Well, no, you're,
well,
because I mean, we play tested it.
That's why I'm thinking of it. Right.
Yeah. And I was going to say, that's also why you had a pretty good jump on, to be fair, when the codex came out, you're like, my army's dialed. Well, you've had the codex for about 6 months.
No, when it was just the index, because like my Craft World army was useless out of the index. Right. That was also another inspiration. I was like, oh my God, my Craft World are shot. And then I was like, wow, my Drukhari look really good right now. I'm like, I'm glad I added to this through the dark times of 7th edition.
You're like, this edition-long misconduct penalty is going to suck.
And that's I guess that's the nice thing about having a couple different armies. That second army or the third army, at least you can, if one's not working, you can switch to something else. And so, like Genestealer Cult, for example, they're limited in many ways. They're really, really cool, but there's a lot to paint. It almost feels like you should start with Tyranids first, and then use Genestealer Cult as your detachment add-on. And nicely, at least then you have a collection of Tyranid bug things that you can sort of play around with. So you have options in case Genestealer Cult, for example, just isn't playing the way you want to play. All right, so let's take a break. We've been talking for just a little while now. Let's take a little break here, and I don't know about you guys, but I do have a sponsor to pay, so we'll take a break for that. If you're like most Warhammer players, you own a ton of models. At one time you had big plans for these models, but now they just kind of sit, gathering dust, unused and unloved. It's time to clean out your closet of shame. Visit TradeArray.com and get cash for your used models. TradeArray is run by Captain A, someone who's been in the community a long time and has done a lot to grow the hobby. He's also a personal friend of the show. Unopened boxes, models on a sprue, half-built models, primed, painted, even bits have value. The process is simple. Send him a list of what you have, he'll send you a quote, you pack it up, send in your stuff, and he'll get you cash. You can shop around, but you're going to find that TradeArray gives you 40% more than the other guys. You want it quick, you want to get rid of it, visit TradeArray.com. Get cash to buy the stuff that you really want. TradeArray.com. Sell your models and get your cash quick and easy. All right, we're back. So I think one of the things is nice to have when you have a collection, and whether you have a series of glass cases to store them in. The IKEA Detolf case is kind of the standard that most of us use. I have a couple myself, but it's nice to look at them and say, "Oh yeah, here's my collection that I can pull from." But having an actual army, like we said, once you have it, it's really easy to add over time. How do you display your armies? Do you have them in boxes, or how do you have them all set up? No, Alex, you just moved, so you. You may not have them actually in some kind of display. You may not actually have them out for display or not.
I actually, I have a single Detolf case. I used to share it with my brother, and I had my Dark Angels and my World Eaters and all that stuff. I took all of that out, and they're all in Tupperware and all that stuff right now. But I have a good chunk of my my Eldari stuff in a display case right now. But like, yeah, so I have like one case where I put out all my really nice looking units and all my favorite, coolest looking stuff. And so, you know, when I walk by, I'm like, oh yeah, I did it. I did the thing.
Yeah.
And then, you know, the rest of the time, I just like, Brian sort of inspired me in this regard into getting everything just in a carry case too.
Yeah.
So
So
like my
go.
Yeah,
It's like a go bag.
Right, yeah, it's a bug out bag. But yeah, so like I keep most of my infantry just in my army bag. I have like a bad back, so like the packing up process can sometimes take the wind out of my sails before a game if I'm leaving the house. I just want to grab my stuff, like chucking a few vehicles and some jet bikes in the army case is not a big deal. But like, you know, when you're transporting like, you know, 85,000 Kabalite warriors to a game and then, you know, your metal incubi and you're dropping them on the floor and everything else, like I don't want to mess with that. So I keep that stuff in my case at all times.
Yep. Brian, how do you store or display your armies?
Man. So my Drukhari during playtesting got so banged up and so beat up because the problem that I ran into is that I have I'm going to get the number wrong. It's the Battle Foam. What is it? The 1720 XL. It's their big wheeled sort of like canvas sided bag. Yeah. Because I mean, you have so many, the trays that hold Raiders and things like that are so tall. And I had this like grand plan that I'm going to have everything I own in one case. No, it's not going to fit. I would need 2 of those minimum. Yeah. And the problem you run into with Battle Foam trays themselves, I think are the best in the business. Me too. Like the way they're cut, they are I know a lot of people love KR and I've just had nothing but problems with KR. Cases, like I have KR cases for all my Craft World stuff. But the problem is when you start committing to foam trays and you have a massive collection, the cutout I have for my Venoms, for my KR cases, I have 2 in each case for a Scorpion and a Cobra. And I've never used my Scorpion and Cobra in a game ever, which I think is hilarious because I had a kid born right around when they were played and I don't play games like that. So when I would go to play a game, it was this nightmare thing of like, okay, well, I need to open up all these things and, oh my God, I don't have time for this. I'm just going to throw them all in this flat thing and carry it really carefully. And my stuff was just getting brutalized. And so when I was so tired of doing that there was last year in January 2019, I said, I'm going to paint one army and I'm only going to play this army because I was all over the place and didn't want to rehab a bunch of stuff. So I just played Death Guard. And I made my Death Guard to where it is all in one case is ready to go. So if I need to do a pickup game, I can pound out a list on my phone and I know every unit is in that case. It's good to go. With my Drukhari, I've gone back. So since I started doing my rehab project, starting with the Coven things and any new units that I add, I'm using these resin bases from, there's a Greek eBay seller, Studio Skull, that has these great Eldar bases. And I'm just magnetizing all of them. And I bought the Magnarack thing for the Battle Foam case. I think the Table War case to me is a much better case, but the problem is I have a bum shoulder. And so lugging around one of those Table War cases
heavy,
is a nightmare. It's
and plus,
and I want to bring the big stuff. And if I want to have a couple of flyers, you need a lot of headroom and all that stuff. And so far, like all of my Coven stuff and a lot of Drukhari stuff, I can just have that in the case magnetized, ready to go. In that case, I know I just need to pick that one thing up, put it in the car, and go and play. So because that was what was getting in the way of me playing before. Was there was a game that I had scheduled with Justin, who was on our last show. There was a game I had scheduled with him like before I did that Death Guard project where we were supposed to like play test a thing and all this stuff. And at the last minute, I was so frustrated because I couldn't figure out what case or what bag had a certain unit in it and I couldn't find anything. And it was like, it was a source of stress. And I realized that I wasn't playing games because going down to my basement and sorting through the 85 different boxes to figure out what combination of trays would fit in a KR, and 5 KR boxes or whatever nonsense was going to be, it was turning into work. And so now I have stuff that I know I'm going to play on the regular with some variation in those cases ready to go that I can just pick it up and take it. I mean, otherwise, like my Caradron Overlords for Age of Sigmar, as an example, they are in the Battle Foam boxes with the magnetized bases in case, I want to like slide the Drukhari stuff out and put them in, but they're in storage under the house in a marked box. And just having that army that is ready to go, like your core stuff, maybe I want to switch in 1 or 2 things, but otherwise, like for 99% of my games, I'm ready to go.
Yeah. Yeah, I have the same. Because everybody kind of has a certain case. I'm a KR case guy. So I have all the boxes stacked up, and each box has, the different units in them. But I also have a carrying case that carries 3 of those boxes, and so typically it's just a manner of swapping out the boxes. And so, I have the AdMech in several cases. I have my typically AdMech and or Eldar and or Knights are typically what I've been playing recently. And so that is, you swap them out, and I have this bag, and I go, okay, time to go play, and I just grab it and I go play. And if you're having to mess with it and grab all this stuff, it does. When you're not playing games, you're not necessarily as motivated to really get into your army. So in a weird way, playing helps you to plan and kind of finish a 40K army, because then you're playing. You want to do more of it. You want to do more stuff.
If you guys ever make it out to California, when you see my house, you will go, holy crap, he was right. If you look at the way my house is laid out, there is absolutely nowhere to put any of those glass display cases. It is just a bizarre combination of, when you go to my house upstairs, it was like a loft that was converted into 2 rooms. There's no spot. There's no wall where it makes sense to put one of those on. And when you go to my living room downstairs, there's one wall. The only wall that doesn't have like doors or some sort of a thing on it is just nothing but windows. It's like 2 stories of windows, and you're like, where would I put that case? It would just get faded in the sunlight. And plus my wife doesn't want to look at this stuff. The more she doesn't see it, the longer our relationship goes. So it's kind of,
Yeah. I have an office that I kind of have. You've been over. So I have my own little space that I can mess with. And that's it. It doesn't spill out over any other space for sure. Yeah. So, I guess really the last thing though, when you start to paint, and this is something I haven't always been really good about, keep your painting recipes. It's good that you have them in your head, Brian, but I've had to go, oh crud, how did I do this? And it bugs me when I have, an Eldar army over many, many years. I go back to painting the orange, and I go, oh boy, I can't remember exactly how I did this. When the tones are slightly off, it does bug me. It does. So keeping your painting recipes, writing them down or putting them somewhere, is kind of important.
You know what? I don't write mine down though. And I don't have all of them memorized, because there are some black ones, cold blacks that are very close. And I'm really guilty of this when it comes to commission work. Like my own stuff, I've done enough. Once you've painted, when you get to like the 7,000 points painted plateau, you're pretty sure you have it wired on how you're painting the gems on that army. But what I've had to do, and this is a thing where it's like, you can't fix stupid, but technology can help. When I'm doing commissions during the stages, I take pictures of it, because I don't delete pictures off of my phone. Now I might have to go search through like 7,000 photos to find like the second stage highlight for things. But I will intentionally, when I don't photograph it stage by stage, but when I get to a point, I will line up all of the paints behind them and then just snap a picture. And then that way so it is like writing it down. It's just, I'm just too lazy to write it in my journal. That I keep a journal for like daily painting progress and tracking purchases and when I paint stuff. And, like if I paint something that I bought 5 years ago, I'll go in that journal and cross it off finally, but writing paint recipes down, I do take I'm organized in my job. Yeah. I'm organized in my job. I can't do, my hobby needs to be just chaos.
I do that though. I've been doing that, as so like I have the paint recipe for the purity seals, and I line them all 3 of the paints up, including the wash, and I take a picture of it. And you're right. Basically you go back and you find it later, but it's the simplest thing you can do. And I don't delete pictures off my phone. So, I don't know anyone who has a curated iPhone photo list. So I may have to go back months or years, but I will find that for sure.
Yep.
So cool. All right. You know what? That is all we have, I think, for our discussion. Thank you so much for chatting with me a little bit about this planning and finishing a 40K army. I figure since we're all kind of in quarantine or lockdown or in various stages of hitting the pause, this was a good topic.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for having us on, man. I really enjoyed this. It was fun just thinking about it, explaining the process. got me even more pumped to work on the stuff I'm working on right now.
Yeah, for sure. And if this keeps going, we'll have to do another joint podcast session.
Oh yeah, definitely, dude.
Yeah,
excellent. All right, guys. Where can most of the people listening to my show probably listen to yours, but where can everyone find you?
We are on, you can find us on iTunes. It's just Splintermind, the Dark Eldar podcast. We host on Libsyn. We have a Patreon that you can join and support. You get episodes early. There are different levels. There's a Discord channel that you can join with us. And I finally started doing some painting videos for our Trueborn subscribers and things like that. So
nice.
We got campaigns.
We're all over the place. Campaigns. Yeah.
Yeah, I need to start doing more of that, I think. You guys have inspired me to do more of that as well. So, Splintermind. Splintermind is, I guess they can find you basically on Facebook, and that's where a lot of the stuff is there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in case you guys aren't familiar, it's an all Eldari podcast. All we do is Eldari. So if you're looking just for some dedicated Eldar talk, we'll cover you.
Excellent. All right, guys. All right, good night. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Brian and Alex from Splintermind. Thank you so much for listening to the show. We like to hear from our listeners, so please feel free to message us on Facebook or email us at thebattlehosts@gmail.com. If you'd like to support us, you can help us in a few different ways. You can tell your friends about us. You can like us on Facebook. You can subscribe to us on YouTube and subscribe to us. You can subscribe to us on YouTube, and you can leave a review on iTunes, which does help to boost our listening audience. Finally, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thebattlehosts. For as little as $1 a month, you can help us with the cost of running the show and staying engaged with the 40K community. So thanks for listening to the Battle Hosts. Remember to be a better gamer and to build a better community. Good night.